Okay, good afternoon again, everyone. This is a program that Jim Flautt helped put together. Jim, as I've alluded to earlier, is a member of our board. He has two sons, William and Mitchell, who graduated from MBA, and he has served on the MBA board for about a decade or more. Jim is now going to introduce the panel, and they have prepared some comments, and I think we may have some time for some questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to you now, Jim, and say thanks in advance, and I will afterwards, I know, as well.
Well, thanks, Brad, and really appreciate the opportunity when you approached me about a month ago to come and talk to the faculty about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was, when I was honored, but also, I'm like the poster child for privilege. I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, but I do have lots of friends who are involved with this, and I'm involved with this in my night and weekends work as well as my day job. So assembled this panel, and I appreciate the accommodation for Zoom. I know it makes us all more comfortable. I know I'm still going I'm on the 4-month winning streak of not having to wear pants, so I want to keep that up. So thank you, Brad. I'll wait for the laughter to subside in the room. Okay. So let me just do. Let's go around the horn, and Randy, Nikki, and Gealita, just give a quick intro to yourself, and then we'll dive into some discussion here. I know we'll have a great discussion. I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll save time for questions at the end. We have a few key messages we want to get across. Obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not meant to be comprehensive in 60 minutes here, and it's a complicated and important topic, but hopefully these are some good thought starters as you guys discuss this, I think, tomorrow in some breakout groups, and as MBA continues on its journey on this important subject. So let's start with Gealita. Why don't you give a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll go to Nikki and then Randy.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gealita Greenhill. I am a Nashville native, so born and raised here. I went to Hume-Fogg from a high school perspective. Also went to the University of Tennessee for undergrad and Vanderbilt for graduate school of business. I did leave Tennessee, but for as far as my education goes, I've been in the state of Tennessee. So thrilled to be with you today. So very familiar with MBA. Have friends who have graduated there, are our alum. I currently am the Chief People Officer for the Murphy-Hoffman company, which is a company that is in about 100 locations across 18 states, focused on a large, if you see 18-wheelers, commercial vehicles on the road, we sell those and we service those as well. We provide financing, anything related to refrigeration. So in these hot summer months, so we're a carrier dealer as well. And it's a family-owned company. It's been around for about 40 years. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this organization. I've been there for about 9 months now. Prior to that, I worked in the automotive industry as well as tech industry and consumer goods. So I have had the back half of my career in HR. And before that, I was in sales and operations. So have a pretty different background if you look at it from an HR perspective, but I think I found my way by going into this. So happy to join you here today.
Thanks, Gealita. Nikki?
Yes, hi, I am Nikki Smith-Bartley. I am the Chief Diversity and Talent Strategy Officer at Asurion. I've been there for 10 years now. I am actually from Cleveland, Ohio, but I went to Fisk University here in Nashville and then went to Vanderbilt Law School. And so I've been in Nashville for about 26 years now. I'm also very familiar with MBA. I've got a lot of colleagues whose children, and I have friends who have children who went to the school and go to the school. And I was actually a mock trial coach for Harpeth Hall for about 7 to 8 years, where you beat us several times when I coached there. I am an employment lawyer by trade, so my practice in the legal field was employment law. Last practice at Baker Donaldson where I was also co-chair of diversity as well as a diversity and inclusion trainer. At Asurion, I was outside counsel for them first while I was at Baker, and then came in-house to practice employment law internally with the company. And I now lead diversity and inclusion, and like I said, been there for 10 years. Happy to be here with you today.
Randy?
Hey, I'm Randy Dowell. I'm the founder and executive director of KIPP Nashville. I am originally from Virginia. About 17 years ago, I found myself working and teaching in Boston and hanging out with my best friend at the time, a guy named Ted Callahan, who's an MBA alum, who in our late night walks around Cambridge, we'd talk about this idea of KIPP and me, where would I do it and where could I do it? And I know I wanted to move back to either Virginia, North Carolina, or somewhere south. And he convinced me to come to Nashville. And so 17 years ago, I moved to Nashville, opened KIPP Academy Nashville, and that's grown to 7 schools. So we have 7 schools, 5 in North and East Nashville, and 2 in Antioch, just under 3,000 students. And we are public college prep charter schools. So, and Nikki, last Thursday, one of my nephews just moved in as a freshman at Fisk.
Oh,
so it was an awesome experience to go rendezvous with him out there.
Well, thanks for the background, guys. Let's dive into the topic. So let's just start with a first question to each of you, and let's try to we'll try to go lightning rounds here. So try to keep it maybe 1 or 2 minutes max on the answers. But just give a brief overview of your involvement with your organization or past organizations around this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then we'll dive into more details there. So why don't we start? Let's go with we'll go with Nikki first, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I first started, I guess, dabbling in diversity and inclusion, like I said, at Baker Donaldson, where when we rolled out our initiative, our diversity and inclusion initiative, I was one of the diversity and inclusion trainers that went around to the various offices to educate attorneys on our initiative, why we were doing it, why it was important, and what it entailed. I then became co-chair of diversity at Baker Donaldson, and then at Asurion, because of my background in employment law, where I view it as more of a reactive approach to D&I than a proactive approach, as well as my involvement with D&I at Baker Donaldson. When we decided to roll out our initiative at Asurion, I was tapped to help do that. And so I did it off the side of my desk while I practiced employment law with Asurion for a couple years, and then officially took the role leading diversity and inclusion in November 2017.
All right, thanks. Well, I'm going to come back to what you just talked about on the side of your desk, because I think that's an important point, but we'll come back to that in a second. So Randy, why don't you give a little back, your org's, a little bit of your org's journey on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, so the first, we didn't have the language. I didn't have the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion 15 years ago. But when we started, most of our students, especially in those early days, we were about 98% of our students were Black, and we've had an increasing number of Latino students over the years, but we still are a majority Black organization from student body perspective. But I realized that my staff was largely white, and I had 2 Black staff members. This is probably our 3rd year of operations, and it dawned on me that this was a mismatch and a disconnect, and I wanted to change that. And so I again, without having the language around it, I sat down with both those staff members. I pulled them together and sat down and called a meeting and just said, here's what I'm seeing. Do you see this? And of course, they're like, of course we see this, Randy. We're the only 2 Black people on your team. Yeah, it's obvious. But I had a moment of vulnerability where I told them that I saw that, which was groundbreaking, and not at all, but for me, it felt like it was good. It's a moment in the journey of our organization. And I asked them, if they would be willing and trust me to help me recruit Black teachers and leaders to the team. And that one conversation has led to a daisy chain where just last Friday we had our all staff, all hands meeting, which we did as a Zoom. And our faculty is 50% Black right now, 50% white. We have a very small Latino population and an Asian population, but racially we're 50% people of color, 50% white, and our leadership across our organization has grown to a place where we're about 65% of our leaders are Black and 35% white. And so we're on a journey. That was the starting point.
Thanks. Gealita, a little bit of your history with this topic and
Yeah. Sure. So as I mentioned, I've only been with this company for about 10 months, and over half of it is during a pandemic. But I will say the reason why I was brought in, though, was the importance of the people experience at MHC. So Murphy-Hoffman Company, you'll hear me say MHC. They really recognize that they've grown tremendously over the last decade through acquisition. And through those acquisitions, they got a lot of people who were different than them. I think if you think about a family company and building it and surviving and making sure everybody has a paycheck at the end of the week, you do a lot of things to just get it done, and you get the people you trust. And so those people who trust other people, they all start to look very similar, have very similar experiences. And in order for us to continue to grow in the way that we want to grow, we've got to get the best talent in and really broaden our perspective on what that talent can look like. And so as far as me coming into the organization with experience in talent and development, different industries, all the things that they're looking to do. And part of that is when you expound that, you're going to get people that don't look like you and don't come from the same, location or industry, but bring a different perspective for you to learn from. And so we are at a very early stage. I mean, we're in definitely a reactive mode. So if you look at the bare minimum of we're a government contractor, so you have to have it, an affirmative action plan. So we have that. We have how we're doing transparency and recruitment and those things. So we have the basic foundation elements that you need in order to operate and get government contracts. And so that's where we've been. Now we're looking at more intentionality on talent. So we have succession planning in a more effective way than we've had before. And that calls you to have more conversations about people, and you really start to see what your strength looks like and what your areas of opportunity are. And before then, we just didn't do that. There was never a need. We could always put, John in this spot or Susie in this spot because we knew them. And now we know less of the people, but are still trying to fill these roles. And so it's very clear to the ownership group and the exec team that we've got to do something different. So we are planning, we have a plan that we're going to implement, but we're very early stages. And I'll just hit on one other thing, Jim. Prior to my experience with MHC, I did start up an ERG with another organization, and that's the exposure I've had as far as diversity and inclusion, not necessarily the equity piece. I think equity is coming now that I've left there, but it was definitely a focus on representation and then making people feel that they belong. But that next step of equity is extremely important, and that's really going to make it last. So we can talk more about that later. But
yeah, we'll come back to the difference between diversity, equity, inclusion, and how they're important separately, but how they work collectively as well. But I want to get back to a little one theme here, and Nikki, you kind of mentioned there was the side of your desk. And then, Gealita, you talked about it's a talent strategy, and certainly diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a moral aspect of it. There's a historical aspect of it. But we're not asking any one of your organizations or MBA to kind of teach America history or correct 400 years of wrongs. Can you talk a little bit about this in terms of how you've resourced this, right? Like going from hey, this is sort of like on the side of the desk to, hey, no, this is a business initiative. This is a strategic initiative, and we're resourcing it. And, and I know that we're all different places on that. And we might be just starting. I know Nikki, obviously you and I work together. That it was the side of your desk, and now it's your full-time job, and you got teams, and you got your scope of your remit is gone up. Can you guys talk a little bit about how that's evolved? Because I think it's important for this audience to hear, as organizations go through their journey, about how it goes from a thought, an idea, maybe even an instigator on the board, for example, or on the staff, or a teacher who says, hey, we got to do more, and then it gets resourced right, and everybody comes together, and it goes from being a little side project to, no, this touches everything. So why don't we start with Nikki, or Randy, why don't we start with you? You lead off this time.
Sure. Yeah, I was talking with our chief talent officer about this very thing a couple of weeks ago, and I think the two words that are in my mind are like, am I going to treat this like an obligation, or am I going to treat this like an opportunity? And if I treat it like an obligation, I'm going to treat it as like we do our core work and then we do this. So think about like a teapot that has like this little spout that runs off of it. It's an obligation, then we'll do this, and then this will be our DEI offshoot that we do because we're obligated to. But if it's an opportunity, which is what I believe it is, and I want to like link back to Gealita's point, like this is a diverse globe, right? Like the humanity is racially diverse, and if we really want true excellence, if we want the best, if we want the best people, then we've got to do this diversity, equity, and inclusivity work really well. And so it can't be other, it has to be integrated into everything we're doing. And so one of the evolving thoughts that I'm having is, this, like, how does this work live with our chief of schools and our chief academics? And how does this work live with our chief operating officer and with our chief financial officer? Because it really has to be woven into everybody's strategic plans, annual plans, work streams. And we have to align also on like, what do we want to see different in our world? Because if we go after this, just like any other initiative, we really want to see a change. And so it's, again, all under the banner of this is opportunity. And I think that's what is exciting right now is I feel like we're embracing this time as opportunity, not obligation.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. I think we have, at least four great organizations represented here: MBA, KIPP, Murphy-Hoffman, and Asurion. And those great organizations, when they put their mind to something, oh my gosh, stuff gets done. But if it's not resourced and it's not a priority, they're focused elsewhere. Nikki, you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of the resourcing around this and how that's evolved in your world?
Sure. It's been quite an evolution. I could talk the remainder of the time about the evolution, but I won't do that. I'll try to sum it up fairly quickly. The journey started in 2014. It started with, a few, good troublemakers, right? Agitators about we need to do better. Why do we like this diversity, both at the leadership level as well as folks within the organization? It started with some discussions, right, about what is diversity and inclusion, why is it important? And it started with me talking in those forums about it. And then it moved to a culture change. When we had those discussions, what we understood is that we had to look at one, data to understand what our gaps were and what our opportunities were. And then two, because we had been silent up to that point, it would be disingenuous to come out with some splashy, this is our new diversity and inclusion initiative, and it's so important to us. It wasn't important to us, yesterday, but it's important to us now. And so it was really critical for us to grow into a brand, so to speak. And so we started with grassroots efforts with our employees and our employee resource groups. And so we created those groups, had a policy to have those groups form, and we allowed them to be the voice of the employees of what was needed, what was lacking, what were the barriers. And our Women's Initiative group and our Pride group were two of the first that started. And they really helped to implement policy change. So everything from changing our EEO statement to improvement of maternity leave policy to a gender transition resource guide to going from a self-assessment of 50 on the corporate equality index of the Human Rights Campaign to getting a 100, a perfect 100. And that was through our employee resource groups. And so we started with a culture change, our ERGs. We had, I think, 4 ERGs when we first started it. Within a couple of months, we got 4 ERGs and we had 1,000 people participating. That was within a couple of months. And then fast forward a year and we were at 10 employee resource groups and 3,000 people participating. And now I took the role officially in 2017, got a team, got resources, was asked to actually create the function. And now we're at 10 ERGs, 77 chapters globally with close to 7,000 people participating. And so it went from a off the side of your desk to a culture change to actually building a function. And now I'm in the new phase, which is making sure that it truly is embedded in all that we do from an employee lifecycle standpoint. So before I just led diversity and inclusion, now I lead diversity and inclusion, leadership development, and talent attraction and outreach, because it's critical that there is a diversity and inclusion lens throughout that entire life cycle of an employee. So attraction of talent, engagement of talent, development of talent, as well as, retaining that talent. And so that's been the evolution in a nutshell without going into my 40-minute speech on it.
Yeah, no, so much in there. And obviously, MBA has, is an organization with staff and talent, as well as the student attraction. So we think about staff and students, we can that's the analog here. But, a couple of points you brought up there, which is, it has to be, in some respects, a cultural shift. You have to leverage the culture, grassroots, has to be authentic. We'll come back later and talk about, I think, the importance of, the top down. It just can't be top down, because then it's just being done to you, not with folks, right? But you have to have that top down so you do get the resources and the support and the drumbeat, that constant drumbeat. And then we'll talk about goals a little bit, but I'm going to let Gealita talk a little bit about, the resourcing and how it's gone, in your career from Mars, the Bridgestone, Firestone to Murphy-Hoffman, how you've seen it evolve from, hey, that's something we do on the side, to more, no, this is a business initiative. This is what we're getting after.
Yeah, I would say I've been fortunate to see progress each time I've joined a different company that they were focused on it. I would say this is the first time I've been involved in the getting the started pieces of all of it, from the top down. So I'll speak to what I've seen in the past. And I think, to speak to what Nikki mentioned about employee resource groups, like I said before, co-founder and executive sponsor for one, and we all, the founding group was 4 of us, didn't want to do it. I mean, we just did not want to do it. And we would meet. And so that was kind of our safety net, right? We'd meet, we were executives. And so we felt like we had access and that we could help others. And we just didn't have the space to do another job. That's kind of what it felt like. And so for us, it was, if we were going to do this, we need to have money behind it. We need a budget. We want to make sure that it's supported. And how do we get that support? And so it was a grassroots effort. I mean, beyond the initial pieces of us starting it and going to our executives to say, this is what we believe it can be. And it was from a business standpoint. It was less morality, more business, right? It was more of, you have a percentage of your population, and if you look at the breakdown of that percentage, they are not in position to succeed you or succeed in these different levels, but you have a large proportion of females as well as ethnic minorities and different things of that nature, and really saying, we have done a lot with our culture and we're out in the community saying all of these things, but as people come in and we're noticing that they're leaving, as soon as they come in, within 6 months to a year, they're leaving. So you're making this investment that's just going away. And so showing the data to support why it was necessary was a part of that journey to get us to that place and we had a person that was on fire, came from Atlanta, was at Coca-Cola, started one there, started one at P&G, and then went on to Kimberly-Clark. So they had already done this somewhere else and knew the value of having it. So having them be able to tell their stories, and we did this, when you say grassroots, I mean, I'm not saying we went to the president every month, but once we were able to get the support that we needed, and the employees that were on the front lines were the reason why we ended up doing it. We said we've got to stop being selfish and with our time, but we see an opportunity to help others. And that was the reason why we started this group to begin with. We didn't have a name, we didn't have any of that. But by the time we selected the president of this group, because she moved here from Atlanta and said, I have no community roots here. I don't feel that it's welcoming. I go to Atlanta every weekend. I mean, there was no sense of belonging. And that really resonated with us as the leaders in the room to say, she has no sense of belonging and she's a rock star. She's amazing at what she does. She's constantly recruited because she does a wonderful job in her functional area, but she still feels this way. And so she took that passion that she had there and leveraged us to get the right access. And it's completely blown it out of the water within 18 months. I mean, the partnership with other ERGs across the city. I mean, she joined with AB. I think she had some conversations with Asurion to really get some insights in order to bring back to our team to say what we could do more of. So we did get funding. We got funding more so beyond recruitment. So it was what we can do from a multicultural perspective. So it was not just a beating a drum of, I'm Black, you need to hear me, you need to hear what I'm saying. You have to get to know people first before they're going to care about your story or care about your situation. And so how do we start to have these conversations and make it welcoming for people? And this is well before what we're experiencing today. And everything was around seeking to understand. So if we, there's obviously your classic is Black History Month, so we're going to do something for Black History Month, but it went beyond those things. There was like a poetry reading, and everybody came from all walks of life. It wasn't just African Americans that were in that particular space. So I would say it starts with grassroots. It can, and they had tried from the top before, but it just felt like I'm being told what to do. And so they really relied on the ERGs to help shape the rest of the story. And it's still continuing to this day.
Yeah, you brought something up that I want to come back to in a little bit, but you talked about the understanding and listening. And, there's been a lot of talk in different circles around, that it has to be a change of mindset, a change of skill set. And, the mindset is empathy and the skill set is listening. But we'll come back to that. I do want to circle back to something you just touched on at the very end, which is, can you guys talk a little bit about, okay, there's diversity, there's equity and inclusion, and how those kind of get, they get muddled together, they're not the same. How are they different? How do they work together? And, what are the pitfalls if you focus just on one? Many companies, for example, they just have a goal around the diversity, the numbers. And we all know that's a steep climb in the best of circumstances. It's really steep if you're not doing the inclusion and equity part of it. So, Nikki, you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go around the horn on that topic a little bit.
Did you say me, Jim? Yeah. So diversity is just the mix, right? It's the mix of differences. That's diversity. And most organizations have diversity. They may not have a lot of diversity, but most organizations have a mix of different people. Inclusion gets more to the feeling, right? Do I feel welcomed? Do I feel like I belong? Do I feel like an outsider? That's the inclusion piece, and creating that culture change where it's not just, okay, it's a number, check the box, you're here, we've got some Black people now. It really is about, not only do we have Black people, we value you. We want to hear your opinion. We want you to feel like you belong. The equity piece goes into, it's really about systems and processes, right? And it's getting to that place that no matter who you are, what you look like, who you love, that you have the same opportunity to be, speaking from a corporation, to be recruited, to be hired, to be developed, to succeed. And it's making sure that you examine every policy, process, system, informal, formal, that you have in place to mitigate any biases that are inherent in those policies, to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed and everyone is treated equally. And that's the difference between DE and I. So
you make a great point about you talk about systems and policies and processes, so important, but it's the unwritten ones. We're going to get to where each of your organizations struggle, but I'm just going to cut to the chase for Asurion. Okay, so everybody on the board and executive team looks like this guy. And when I say looks like me, I mean down to the resume. There's no process saying that you got to have a Stanford MBA to be on the executive team or the board of Asurion. But if you look at the outcome, it sure looks that way. So changing those kind of unwritten rules and the unwritten networks in our internal, just where our comfort zones. We'll come back to that. Randy, you want to talk a little bit about this? I know that you've had both on your team and in KIPP's journey, a lot on this topic, both from parents and staff and teachers and your leadership team, about the diversity, equity, and inclusion and those words and what they mean and how you manage that.
Yeah, I see it, the same definitions, Nikki, that you shared. The diversity is the mix. Your inclusion is how do you feel? Do you feel part of, or do you feel excluded from? And then equity, you talked about policy. I also would add a layer of to this whole idea of the unwritten, the networks that you have and the networks that people have. And I think this is where, in my work, I find probably the most joy in my life. It's so fun to learn new things. There's safety and comfort in the same, but there's learning and excitement and interesting and expansion in learning something different. And so, one of the ways I think about this equity is, okay, so who in my organization gets access to me and my time, and where am I, and so take the 17-year journey of being the leader of KIPP Nashville. Early on, it was very much people who were in had a similar pedigree to me. And at some point I realized, I need to be more intentional about where I spend my time. And for the last 5 years, I've formally and informally, but all of my formal mentoring of emerging leaders has intentionally been with emerging leaders of color, all actually emerging Black leaders on the team. And it's just, a source of joy for me because I learned so much in the interaction and in the engagement. And also, I've realized it doesn't diminish the amount of time or effort that I'm giving to people that are same pedigree as me. They still that group feels comfortable calling me on Friday night, and comfortable texting me on a Saturday with hey, I got a question. But what, then that's where the equity gap is. If I have a really talented Black leader who is thinking, I can't just text Randy on a Saturday morning. No, but I need, if I can make it explicit to them that yes, you can, and that's okay. And not only is that okay, but that's actually something I want, I desire, because I want to invest in you and I want to see you grow. I want to put, challenges and resource you to go tackle things. And then when they start winning in new ways, then I start learning too, because now I'm seeing them tackle problems that have been persistent that I've never been able to solve. And so it's some of our Black leaders tackle problems that have long, been elusive to me, and I get to learn from them and strengthen my leadership. So I really think there's something about time, access to resources, access to leadership that's a really important key to that equity question.
Yeah, and Gealita, I'm going to shortcut you on that topic. We're going to switch. I'm going to give you another one, but just put a circle around that. I always think of the inclusion as, are people bringing their best? Are they bringing their A game? They feel like they bring their best person to work every day, and that might be for MBA, staff. It could be leadership. It could be the students. It could be the parents. And that would be the question around inclusion. Do they bring their best selves, or are they always walking on eggshells? And that, by the way, that could be that could be black, brown, or white parents, right? Do they feel like this is like home? Let's talk a little bit about like the top down. And I want to get to goals, because they're at times, and we've all seen this over all of our careers of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever we called it 10 years ago. It would be a lot of feel-good words, and then it would go away, because it's probably on the side of somebody's desk. It was a resource, all the things we talked about. But there was also no goals, and we all know what a good goal looks like. I'm going to go from X to Y by this date, or something like that, and somebody who owns it, and it's measurable, and it's realistic, and all those sorts of things. I think there's we talked about it earlier in our prep. There's a SMART goal, right? It's specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related. And that's important for this, because Nikki, you mentioned, hey, the first thing Asurion does, which is, the DNA of Asurion is like, show me the data. Where are we now? And then let's start tracking that. Are we making progress? So can we talk a little bit, Julia, I'll start with you, and just, how you think about like the big, hairy, audacious goals, as well as, the interim goals of any of these, of this sort of initiative, this sort of intentionality.
Yeah, I think I know early on when we started talking about diversity and inclusion, it was very much, what is the business return, right? Like, what's the return on investment? You want me to invest in this, but how does this trace back? So then it was like, well, our customers look this way, so we want to make sure that we're representative of our customers, right? Then it's, well, we are in this community, so we need to look like the community. So everything that could tie back to appearance was kind of like the first thing you started to see around targets. And then it was like, well, how can you really measure that? All right, like, how can you really measure that? So then you go to what is the business need we're trying to achieve? And so what I've seen work well is you do need to know what that business need is. I mean, in some cases, like today, I think in this day and age in 2020, you can go with, hey, you see what's happening on the public scale. If we're not doing anything, we're going to get skewered. So we have to do something, right? And whatever that looks like, yeah. And you don't have to like the person, but we're going to do this because we're going to be attacked, right? But what I've seen happen and what work, and that's why you kind of start, I love to hear that Asurion has tied talent into this discussion in the title with Nikki, because that usually speaks to work starting to get done. I mean, people change over time as they start to get exposed to people, but it's like, we have a talent gap, and what we've been doing is not working. And you can even just take off color, you can take off age, you can take off everything. It's like, where am I going to find the best people? And when everybody says, well, I don't want to just I just don't want you to tell me I need to bring in 10 Hispanics. I mean, I want the best person. And I'm like, well, how do you know you haven't chosen the best person? Because you didn't look at all of the talent, right? And so once you start to bring that talent in and they start to perform and people have more exposure to them, then those people are referring other people and they trust the judgment of that person. So if I see a person of color in a position that is doing an amazing job, I'm probably going to look twice at that person that sit in front of me for an interview the next time. But I've never seen it, I'm probably not going to trust it. And I think we just need to be very crystal clear about that there are people who probably for the first time seeing a person of color in leadership is at their company. They may have never seen that coming in. And so I think we try to downplay that, but it's true. If you don't see it, you won't believe it. And so part of that is when you say representation, having a full holistic goals, like you have representation goals, you have goals that show, what percentage of people you are bringing in every year, how long are they staying, when do they leave, why are they leaving? But then it's also, how do you know that they're included? You got to have measures around inclusion that goes into retention and, your numbers related to your ERGs, what difference, do you have behavioral goals like those that are in between that you say aren't quantifiable, but you say, when I go into my town halls, do they look the same that they did a year ago? That's a data point for you that you don't even need to see. It's just are people asking questions now? Do people feel comfortable asking questions that challenge the status quo? If you're not seeing that, you have a bigger problem. It's not just a color problem. It is, do they feel comfortable enough or feel like they will be taken care of if they don't do it? So some of those measures that you wouldn't necessarily be able to check off from a metric standpoint, you can see over time on employee surveys and are people really pushing back. And then on the equity piece, I would just look at it as when you're saying you're having these pipelining discussions around talent and you're looking at who's next, who's coming up, we're never going to change the needle if every person in the pool looks the same. And, it's just not going to happen. And so how comfortable are we with really pushing that envelope of we're going to talk about talent bi-monthly or quarterly and really hold ourselves accountable to the metrics that we're seeing. You can't just say, well, we tried and they're not coming through. It's like, what is the true action plans that we have forward and that we are measured against, and do they need to change? They may have worked for a period of time or not. So I've seen where it's worked more specifically when it's holistic in the data. So it's not just bad. It's not that bad to just say, how many people are you bringing in? That's a part of it. But then it's also, do you have measures for inclusion? Do you have measures for equity? And knowing that you're breaking through some of these barriers that are being set up.
Now, you bring a good point, which is, everybody can measure, everybody can kind of count noses and do the diversity numbers. But there's very few things you can't figure out a way to at least get a proxy for a measure. And, the employee surveys, heck, if nobody's responding, that's an issue. But when you get responses, then you can start tracking it. And they might be, for MBA, it might be student, parents, alum, staff, and all of a sudden you're listening, right? And the answers are there. Even if they're not telling you something, the silence is actually a sign. And, kind of discerning that and then be able to track that and how those sentiments change over time is probably a reflection of the actions you're taking. And we all know, like you talked about the talent pipeline, it's the old Chinese proverb, but when's the best time to plant a tree, right? 30 years ago, right? It was the next best time to plant a tree today. So, you got to start filling that up now. Sometimes you bring from the outside. Hey, I know we're about 15 minutes left. So, and by the way, I appreciate the audience bearing with us in our conversation here. There's nothing that says horrible situation than a conference room with a Zoom call talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So appreciate you guys' engagement. So I thought I'd open it up for some questions from the audience, and then maybe we'll conclude with some final thoughts we want to leave with you guys and give you some encouragement and fortitude on that way out the door. So are there any questions in the studio audience? Or Brad, maybe you have a question or two you'd love for the group here to tackle.
We're in several different locations, so I'm reminding everybody you might text Mark Artisan if you have a question.
While we're waiting, I'll just ask, any one of you three, we don't have to go around, but hey, what's been the biggest challenges out there at D&I? We all know there's uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable conversations, and I know personally, over my arc on this, both personally and professionally, has been I cherish the uncomfortable conversations now because, Randy, to your point, I learned so much and I get awesome feedback. Once you have that kind of trust-based conversations and there's, like the vulnerability goes away, and man, the things you hear and it just makes the organization better, it makes you a better person, and makes everybody better. What are some of the, challenges that you flip into an opportunity that you've seen out there, either on a one-on-one basis or organizational basis? If you guys have any thoughts on that?
I'll go. I did not realize how hard diversity and inclusion work is. It touches everything, and that's why when I talked about the conversation of embedding, why it's so important, because it really does touch everything. And I think the expediency is my biggest challenge, right? It's like, even when you got everybody you need on board and you're like, I want to see those numbers move. I want to see those numbers move. It's not that easy, right? And that part of that is change management, right? Getting folks, having to change the policies and get folks comfortable with the policies and the processes that you're changing. And even with recruiting, when you're saying, okay, bring more, underrepresented minorities in, it's not like they just come through the door and, and everybody that you make an offer to is going to, take your offer. Right. So I would just say that understanding that it's not going to happen overnight. And it's like, no matter how hard you work, you might not see those numbers change. But to Gealita's point, like, if you see that culture change, you're making a difference. When folks are starting to have those uncomfortable conversations, and we've got a movement, I'll call it, that we call Be Bold, where we have uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. We try to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's called hot topics, and hot coffee and hotter topics is our tagline. Be Bold is the movement. And we've talked about everything from barriers to access for African Americans, to taking a knee, to the ABCs of LGBTQIA, to religious inclusion, to the Me Too. We talked about everything. And we continue to have those conversations, and it really does change the culture of the workplace, because people start to open up and you start to talk about things you never talked about before. And that really helps to transform and give people, that level of comfort to say, okay, well, how come there weren't any minorities on your interview panel? Things of that nature. It just makes it.
You bring some great points there, which is, and a lot of those conversations, I mean, there's going to be emotion. And by the way, people, and this isn't about an I agree or disagree conversation. It's about listening, empathy, understanding. We're not asking anybody to check their humanity at the door, right? I mean, it's just listen and try to put yourself in another person's point of view. And if you do that, then the organization starts doing that. Any questions out there, Brad or Mark or folks in the room?
Mark's going to have to help me because he's with the room. I'm in my office at the moment.
Sure. Randy, do you have any concrete tips for DEI vis-a-vis classroom teachers?
Gealita, I saw you leaning forward, okay, if you do.
Gealita's got it. All right.
Do you have one? Do you have something, Gealita? If not, I'll share what I'm thinking.
Go for it.
Yep. I think the concrete tip is you got to start with you. Think about a pond that's totally glassy and serene. You throw a rock in the middle of it and it expands out. And so this is, early on after George Floyd was murdered, I took a video camera and I basically talked to that video camera for about 5 minutes, with just some thoughts from the heart. And one, I'm not sure who asked this question, if it's a white teacher or a black teacher or a manager of teachers. But for my white teacher friends out there, I would say, just like the ripple in the pond starts with you. So your relationships, do you have relationships that are peer-to-peer with black friends and colleagues? If yes, good. Do you have a place in your life where you have a black leader who's an authority over you? And I can think about any of the variety of places that we get mentored, or could be somebody who's a thinker that you listen to. But there's something to the authenticity of both having personal relationships across the line of the racial difference lines, and also putting yourself in submission to a black leader if you're white. That changes the way that you think and the way that you see. And I think those things will bring authentic changes that I probably couldn't name what those are, but that would translate to how black students would receive you in the classroom.
I'll just add something there, and like most everything in my life, I don't have an original thought. I just copy other good people's thoughts. And one of the messages I think we wanted to leave here is like individually and collectively as organizations. So everybody in this room individually has to do the work. When I say everybody in this room, I'm going to be really clear. White people in this room, you got to do the work. The internet's powerful. There's great blogs. Everybody knows the reading list. There's a bunch of them going around. We have one that we shared amongst ourselves. We can send it to Brad. They can get it to you. It's all the books you know. It's all the blog sites you know. You got to do the work. Go read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. And if you're a history professor out there or a history teacher out there, and you haven't read that, you're behind. Go read that. Those are the sorts of things. Do the work. Just don't go collapse in a puddle of tears into your closest Black friends or the parents of your Black students and say, I never knew. Oh, help me. Do the work and then start having that conversation. So that would be my kind of more like hard ass sort of advice on that question. So I'll probably just discourage from anybody else from asking a question. But any other questions out there?
There's another one.
I've got one. I think Gealita talked earlier about, and this is going to be like my concluding thought, so maybe this is my concluding thought. Talented people get to choose where they go. And talented people, whether they're adults or kids or parents of kids, the most talented people get to get their choice of the litter. That's just the way life works. And so the status quo excludes a big section of the most talented people, both adult talent and kid talent. And that's only going to become more extreme along the lines of racial difference in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And so if you want to be surrounded by the best at whatever you do, the status quo isn't going to surround you by the best people, because the best people are not all white, and we have a diversifying country, and we have talented people of color, children of color, families of color, and employees, future employees of color, who get all sorts of choices. And if you can pivot and let that wind blow you instead of pushing against it, it'll really allow you to surround yourself with excellence and truly the best.
Well, I was just going to say that if we remained in the status quo today during a pandemic, where would we be? Like many companies right now are recognizing that the leadership they thought they had, they are not seeing it, and are looking for people who have worked internationally, have done so many different things to be able to bring solutions that are out of the box, or way out of a box, that are working. And if you have the same people around you with the same thoughts, status quo will only continue to go down, down, down. Like you cannot elevate from that. You can't get innovation from that. You can't get new ideas and new ways of working when it's the status quo, because you just have the same ideas circulating, the same thoughts and processes. So I would say if you're comfortable with the status quo, over time, you're going to get very uncomfortable with the status quo, because the performance will stagnate, and you won't be prepared for what's thrown at you or what's ahead, because you don't have a team that has capability or skills in many different ways to pull you through. And I'll just add this last thing. You don't have to ask me for any ending. I would just say I can recognize, and I've been told by my ownership group, that they would not have been as prepared for this situation had they not hired me. And the reason why, it's not because I'm extremely intelligent. It's because I have a wide network and a lot of people that I've embraced over my career that have brought us so many different things in different industries for us to get through where we are today, where we're still thriving through a pandemic. So it's a clear example of bringing in someone that's completely different. I will tell you, I'm probably the youngest executive. I'm the only female, and I'm the only Black person. I am sure 5 years ago, they didn't think that would be who was leading HR. But at the same time, what they said is that we needed someone like you to get us through this period of time. And so I just challenge people, when you think about the status quo, to challenge your thinking about what you could be missing as a result of it.
I'm going to brag on Gealita. I mean, Randy and I have been trying to hire her at KIPP forever. And she goes and works for an old school trucking company in Kansas as the head of HR. And it's like, you are not afraid of anything. So thank you. Nikki, I know you wanted to say something.
I'm always reminded I'm out of my league when I'm talking with Gealita and anything like this.
Not at all.
What I was going to say is if you are content with the status quo, you're probably a benefactor of the status quo. And so think about those who are not the benefactor of the status quo, and then put yourself in their shoes and say, would you be content? And that's all more reason why not to be content with the status quo. And then I do want to go back to your question about the question to from the audience about advice to teachers. I would say check your bias. Check your bias when you're teaching these children. Check your bias when you're interviewing teachers. Check your bias when you're in the grocery store. We all have biases. It impacts us. You know, if you have a brain, you have bias, and it impacts our decisions every day. It's not natural to just, you're not going to be able to eradicate bias, but you can mitigate it. And it really does have, as a mother of Black boys in a predominantly white school, I know that they can feel the difference when they're the only Black children in that classroom. And as the teachers of my children, I need you to embrace them, and I need them to not feel that bias. So check your bias.
Thank you, Nikki. And I'll go ahead and wrap up a little first. Brad and MBA team, thank you for your time. Panel, Nikki, Gealita, Randy, thank you so much. I love you guys. Just some final thoughts, to some of these questions. We want to leave you with some encouragement and fortitude. The encouragement is, this is important and doable, and you got to do it. And I know Randy talked about like the obligation versus opportunity. It's both, man. It's absolutely an obligation. But boy, you get excited when it's an opportunity. Want to leave you with fortitude. The more you do, the more you got to do. And KIPP nationally, so not just Nashville, but nationally, I would say is further along the journey than just about any organization on the planet. And they don't get it right, okay? And, the CEO of KIPP nationally, sent a mea culpa, just basically saying, it's like, wow, I've really screwed this up for the last 10 years. I thought I was doing good. Here's what we're going to do to do it better. So the more you do, the more you got to do. And you're not going to get 100% right. Doesn't mean you don't keep trying. So do your homework, read, listen with empathy. Be bold with goals, real goals, and the goals you say out loud to everybody over and over and over and over again. And when you're tired of saying them and you think you've told everybody 1,000 times, you've only begun to communicate. So when you say those goals out loud, one, everybody's online, everybody knows what you're about. And also, now hold all of you, if Brad starts saying those goals out loud, can hold Brad accountable. Because if we said it out loud, hey, I'm going to lose 20 pounds in 6 months. If I don't lose 20 pounds in 6 months, you guys are going to be able to tell, and you're going to call me out in 6 months. So, it's similar sort of concept. Last thought I would say is, obviously be intentional and mindful in this, but everybody in this room, you guys don't realize the superpowers you guys have. You have incredible superpowers. What are you going to use those superpowers for? And on this topic, there's a lot you can do. Let me tell you what your superpowers are. Influence. If you guys don't realize this, every one of your neighbors within a 10-block radius of wherever you live knows you're an MBA teacher or a staff member, and they're thinking, if they have a glimmer in their eye and they know somebody who is, a 10 to 12-year-old boy, they're thinking, I got to get to know you. You have superpowers. You have influence. You have smarts, the MBA culture, the resources at your fingertips. Look around the audience, look around the auditorium, go step outside, look at the new sports facility, look at the resources at your fingertips, the platform you have, the audience you have with students, parents, other staff, other faculty, alumni. It's incredible. And then back to the status quo. The status quo is incredibly powerful. Unconscious bias and status quo, when you stop being intentional about this and you're new at this, the first thing you do is you're going to slide back into that, not even knowing. You got to fight that. To Nikki's point, you got to check your biases at those sorts of times. But if you think about this in terms of status quo, MBA didn't stop at status quo from the curriculum from 30 years ago when Brad started. Look where we are now. We're sending kids all over the planet. We didn't stop at status quo in the buildings, in the grounds and facilities. Look what it looks like now versus 30 years ago. Let's apply that same intentionality and boldness to this topic. And what's the campus? What are the boys? What's the alumni look like? How are they going out in the world? What are they armed with? How are they going to succeed? They're going to succeed no matter what, but they're going to succeed with this new set of tools in their toolkit and their friends and culture and, and connection to community. That's what you guys are going after. So I'll leave it there. And again, thank you for your time. I hope this sparks some good conversation over the next few days and translates to action.
Thank you, Jim. It will spark some great conversation. And thanks for the great sense and ideas and perspectives, Nikki and Gealita and Randy. And we value your taking your time today to be with us. And we hope you'll come visit us and share more ideas. Jim, it's a privilege to work with you. And you have a great afternoon. And to all of those listening, we're finished with our meetings today. I'll see you in the morning. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.